Even as a nation grieves the inevitable passage of time, it must simultaneously brace itself for the heavy inheritance of the future. For centuries, the British monarchy has ostensibly stood as an unyielding monolith, which serves as a beacon of continuity amidst a rapidly fracturing world. Yet beneath the gilded ceilings and the stoic portraits of sovereigns past an unprecedented tectonic shift is quietly and inexorably unfolding. The events that began to spiral out of control in the bleak winter of 2026 were not merely an unfortunate string of family disputes. They were the absolute catalyst for a fundamental reimagining of the crown. At the epicenter of this seismic transformation stands Prince William, who is a man tasked with a burden few can genuinely comprehend. In the tumultuous wake of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor being arrested, Buckingham Palace has become the silent battlefield for a precarious transition of absolute authority. This is a transition that has violently disrupted the established hierarchy and created a profound and perhaps irreparable rift with Queen Camilla. To understand the sheer magnitude of this paradigm shift, one must cast their gaze back to the 19th of February in the year 2026. It was a day that unequivocally shattered any remaining illusions of impenetrable royal protection. The arrest of Prince Andrew did not merely dominate the international press, but rather it sent a visceral shockwave through the very foundation of the institution. However, for Prince William, this catastrophic scandal was not a sudden revelation, but rather the grim materialization of a deeply entrenched fear. For years, the Prince of Wales had acutely recognized the existential threat posed by his uncle and his highly questionable associations. Long before the devastating BBC interview of 2019, where Andrew displayed a staggering lack of judgment regarding his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, William had been a solitary voice of pragmatism echoing within the palace walls. He had vehemently urged both his father and his late grandmother to unequivocally sever the institution from these mounting controversies. Yet those early warnings were swallowed by the sentimental inertia of family ties. Queen Elizabeth II was inextricably bound by maternal devotion and found herself profoundly reluctant to cast her favored son into the wilderness. Charles, who was then the Prince of Wales, felt trapped in the agonizing purgatory between unyielding loyalty to the sovereign and mounting apprehension for his brother. He ultimately opted for a path of hesitant moderation. William, however, maintained a relentless and unflinching perspective. He comprehended with a razor-sharp clarity that perhaps only the true heir could possess that public confidence in the monarchy is not an immutable divine right. It is a fragile construct hanging by the most delicate thread imaginable. When the inevitable transpired and Andrew was apprehended on devastating allegations regarding the mishandling of confidential government documents, the dynamic of power within the House of Windsor shifted with breathtaking speed. William and his long-ignored foresight suddenly granted him an unassailable moral and strategic authority. He was no longer merely the heir apparent waiting patiently in the wings. He became the absolute architect of the survival strategy for the crown. The urgency of this ascent has been tragically accelerated by a deeply personal sorrow that has shadowed King Charles almost from the inception of his reign. The king is a man who had waited an astonishing 73 years to fulfill his destiny, which is longer than any heir in British history. Yet he found his long-anticipated sovereignty cruelly ambushed by fate. Just 17 months after ascending the throne, the devastating revelation of his cancer diagnosis forced a radical recalibration of the royal calendar. Throughout the grueling months of 2024 and 2025, Charles fought a valiant and silent battle against his illness, while attempting to project an aura of unwavering institutional stability. The tragic synchronicity of Princess Catherine undergoing her own preventative chemotherapy for an abdominal cancer diagnosis further complicated the narrative. This dual health crisis temporarily sidelined the most potent modern assets the monarchy possessed. Adversity, however, has a profound way of accelerating the inevitable. Faced with his own mortality and the glaring vulnerability of the institution, King Charles began a quiet and methodical abdication of functional power. Although the palace has fervently dismissed any whispers of an impending formal transition, the empirical evidence suggests a profoundly different reality. By delegating the highly coveted authority to issue royal warrants to William and Kate, Charles signaled a definitive shift. This privilege to endorse brands and products is historically guarded with immense jealousy by reigning monarchs. Charles began treating his son not as a subordinate waiting for his turn, but as an equal partner in a high-stakes crisis. Behind the majestic mahogany doors of the chambers of the king, the succession plan is not a theoretical blueprint gathering dust. It is a living and breathing operation currently in relentless motion. Armed with this newly consolidated power, Prince William has embarked upon a ruthless corporate-style modernization of the firm. His vision is radically divergent from the anachronistic aristocratic complacency that characterized much of the 20th century monarchy. William envisions a streamlined and highly accountable apparatus that functions with the clinical efficiency of a modern multinational conglomerate. He fundamentally believes that the era of impenetrable royal mystique must be supplanted by transparent reporting structures and measurable objectives. This ideology was not born in a vacuum. It is the exact blueprint he and the Princess of Wales have flawlessly executed within their royal foundation. By demanding a reduction in the suffocating influence of legacy courtiers, William seeks to ensure that the monarchy is judged not by its ancient bloodlines, but by its tangible and pragmatic utility to the public it serves. He embraces the challenge of initiating a profound metamorphosis within an institution that is historically synonymous with immutability. No revolution, no matter how desperately needed or meticulously planned, is achieved without formidable resistance. The most potent obstacle to this corporate overhaul has manifested not from the British public or the political establishment, but from within the intimate inner circle of the king himself. Queen Camilla has emerged as an unexpected barrier to the modernization strategy. The burgeoning Cold War between the future king and the current queen consort is rooted in a fundamental clash of ideologies regarding loyalty and reputation management. The catalyst for this bitter attrition is the enduring friendship Camilla shares with Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York. For William, whose entirely pragmatic worldview requires the ruthless excision of any element that threatens the integrity of the crown, Sarah Ferguson is an unacceptable liability. Her tangential but documented connections to the Epstein files are characterized by desperate pleas for financial assistance during moments of personal insolvency. William views this as a toxic association the monarchy simply cannot afford. His strategy demands an absolute and unequivocal quarantine of anyone even peripherally adjacent to the Andrew scandal. Camilla conversely operates from a deeply entrenched ethos of personal loyalty. Having endured decades of immense public vilification herself, she views the abandonment of a 50-year friendship purely on the grounds of associative guilt as a grotesque betrayal of human decency. This ideological chasm perfectly juxtaposes the institutional ruthlessness of William against the interpersonal allegiance of Camilla. It has severely fractured the already delicate harmony of the royal household. This ideological war has been further complicated by a profoundly personal and deeply entrenched friction between the two most prominent women in the life of the king. As the crisis surrounding Prince Andrew deepened, it was Princess Catherine, and not Queen Camilla, who emerged as the indispensable crisis manager. With an almost unnerving composure, Kate assumed command of the strategic response. She liaised tirelessly with legal teams to shape the public narrative and flawlessly executed the vision her husband had for crisis mitigation. Her omnipresence and hyper-competence while serving as a lifeline to the beleaguered king have been perceived by Camilla as a deliberate and calculated encroachment upon her territory. For the queen consort, the ascendancy of Kate represents a humiliating marginalization. It is an unspoken assertion that she and the ailing king are fundamentally ill-equipped to navigate the treacherous waters of contemporary scandal without the forceful intervention of the younger generation. The psychological toll of this dynamic is profound. While Charles consistently defends the noble intentions of his daughter-in-law and recognizes her indispensability to the survival of the firm, Camilla finds herself increasingly isolated. She visibly bristles at the subtle yet undeniable usurpation of her influence. When the cameras flash at public engagements, it is the stoic and united front of William and Kate that projects the stability the nation craves. Meanwhile, the queen consort is forced to navigate the peripheral shadows of the diminishing physical stamina of her husband. The climax of this Shakespearean drama arrived in the waning days of February 2026 and culminated in a devastating ultimatum that irrevocably altered the power structure of the British monarchy. Empowered by the tacit endorsement of his father and driven by an uncompromising mandate to sanitize the royal brand, Prince William crossed the Rubicon. He explicitly demanded that Queen Camilla publicly and unequivocally sever her ties with Sarah Ferguson. He framed this not as a mere suggestion, but as an absolute prerequisite for the preservation of the crown. This unprecedented confrontation shattered the centuries-old protocol that dictates an heir must always defer to the consort of the reigning monarch. It was a stark and unvarnished display of absolute authority. William made it unequivocally clear that the survival of the institution supersedes all personal affections and historical loyalties. If the Queen Consort chooses to defy this mandate, she does so at the peril of her own irrelevance. William has demonstrated a chilling willingness to surgically bypass her influence entirely. He is patiently orchestrating a future where his reign and the reign of Catherine will tolerate absolutely no such vulnerabilities. Ultimately, what the world is witnessing is not merely a sequence of unfortunate palace intrigues or tabloid fodder. We are observing the painful and necessary rebirth of an ancient institution in real time. The aging king burdened by mortality is passing the heavy torch of sovereignty. The Queen Consort, clinging to the fading echoes of the loyalties of a bygone era, finds herself increasingly isolated by the relentless march of modernization. And at the helm, Prince William and Princess Catherine are methodically and relentlessly forging a new monarchy. It is one defined by corporate accountability and ruthless pragmatism. The twilight of tradition is upon them, and out of its shadows, a vastly different crown is being forged in the crucible of absolute necessity. The Twilight of Tradition. Part 2. The Anatomy of a Royal Purge. The echoes of the ultimatum issued by Prince William reverberated through the ancient corridors of the royal residences with a deafening finality. It was a definitive declaration of institutional supremacy. The silence that followed was not one of peace, but rather the chilling stillness that precedes a devastating storm. Queen Camilla found herself navigating a profoundly altered reality within hours of that confrontation. The corridors of power, which she had patiently learned to master alongside her husband over decades, suddenly felt alien and hostile. Every subtle movement within the palace now carried the immense weight of political calculation. Princess Catherine assumed a role that utterly transcended her traditional duties. She meticulously orchestrated a masterclass in psychological warfare and public relations. Observers trained in behavioral analysis noted a distinct and chilling evolution in her public posture during this unprecedented crisis. The characteristic warmth and accessibility that had defined her early royal career were deliberately recalibrated into an impenetrable stoicism. Her posture became rigidly perfect, and her eye contact during public engagements was notably sustained and piercing. Every physical gesture and every perfectly timed smile was a calculated maneuver designed to project absolute control over a highly volatile situation. She was no longer just a beloved royal figure. She had transformed into the primary architect of a sophisticated defense mechanism protecting the very core of the crown. Her body language communicated a silent but absolute authority that entirely overshadowed the physical presence of the current queen consort. Beyond this intense psychological theater, the operational realities of the monarchy were undergoing a relentless forensic dissection. The arrest of Prince Andrew on severe charges relating to the mishandling of confidential government documents triggered an unprecedented internal inquiry. William, operating with the cold precision of a seasoned investigator, initiated a comprehensive audit of all internal communications and access protocols within Buckingham Palace. He recognized that the survival of the institution demanded an absolute purging of systemic vulnerabilities. The royal household was abruptly subjected to a level of scrutiny typically reserved for major corporate fraud investigations or national security breaches. William appointed a clandestine task force of former intelligence officers and elite legal minds to trace the exact trajectory of the leaked documents. This was no longer a matter of managing embarrassing family gossip. It was a desperate attempt to sever a gangrenous limb before the infection could destroy the entire sovereign body. the future king ruthlessly interrogated the long-standing privileges of senior courtiers and dismantled the archaic networks of patronage that had allowed the indiscretions of his uncle to remain concealed for so long. William made it abundantly clear that complicity through silence would be treated with the exact same severity as active betrayal. The British public watched this unprecedented drama unfold with a mixture of morbid fascination and mounting anxiety. The revelation that sovereign secrets may have been compromised through the reckless associations of a senior royal profoundly destabilized the fundamental trust between the monarchy and the people. The citizens demanded accountability, and William was acutely aware that any display of familial leniency would be interpreted as gross institutional corruption. This intense public scrutiny served as the ultimate catalyst accelerating the transfer of executive authority from the ailing king to his resolute heir. The socio-political climate in Britain demanded a ruthless leader, and William was entirely prepared to execute that role. Amidst this relentless drive for corporate modernization, Camilla remained a poignant symbol of an obsolete era. Her steadfast refusal to publicly abandon Sarah Ferguson isolated her from the newly established power center. The Queen Consort became a tragically peripheral figure, trapped between her unwavering personal loyalties and the cold, unforgiving demands of the survival of the crown. Her subtle expressions of dismay, documented relentlessly by the global press, revealed a woman profoundly out of step with the relentless pragmatism defining the imminent reign of William and Catherine. When attending official functions, the physical distance maintained between Camilla and the Waleses was palpable. It was a spatial representation of a completely fractured family dynamic. King Charles, meanwhile, found himself serving as a captive spectator to the rapid dismantling of his own court. The severe physical toll of his ongoing medical treatments significantly diminished his capacity to mediate the escalating conflict between his wife and his absolute heir. In the quiet solitude of his private chambers, the king faced a devastating realization. To save the monarchy, he had to sacrifice the authority of the woman he had spent his entire life loving and defending. Charles was forced to silently endorse the aggressive restructuring initiated by William, acknowledging that his own historical legacy would ultimately be defined not by his longevity, but by the decisive and ruthless actions of his son. The transition of power was no longer a theoretical concept whispered among palace insiders. It was a tangible and aggressive reality. William and Catherine were effectively executing a silent coup, fundamentally reshaping the British monarchy from an institution defined by hereditary entitlement into a heavily fortified corporate entity driven by accountability. The age of aristocratic indulgence was being brutally eradicated and replaced by a regime of uncompromising forensic transparency. The Twilight of Tradition. Part 3. The Dawn of the Pragmatic Sovereign. As the bitter winter thawed into an unforgiving spring, the British public bore witness to a constitutional metamorphosis, unlike any seen since the abdication crisis of the previous century. The impending legal proceedings surrounding Andrew Mountbatten Windsor loomed over the entire nation, acting as a brutal catalyst for the final stages of the systemic purge initiated by Prince William. The deeply entrenched networks of aristocratic privilege that had successfully shielded the most egregious royal transgressions for decades were now being systematically dismantled under the relentless and unforgiving scrutiny of the future king. William demonstrated a chilling capacity for ruthlessness that completely redefined the modern perception of the crown. The public relations strategy orchestrated by Princess Catherine simultaneously entered its most critical and aggressive phase. She smoothly transitioned from a defensive posture of crisis management into an assertive projection of absolute moral authority. The global media apparatus, entirely captivated by this unprecedented royal drama, scrutinized every single public appearance for subtle shifts in the established hierarchy. It became glaringly obvious to political commentators and the general public alike that King Charles, despite his profound desire to unify his fractured family, was physically and politically incapable of halting the meteoric ascension of his son. The debilitating effects of his ongoing medical treatments forced the monarch into a state of prolonged convalescence. This created an immense power vacuum that William moved decisively and unapologetically to fill. The daily operational briefings and the critical engagements with the Prime Minister increasingly fell under the exclusive purview of the Prince of Wales. Charles was tragically reduced to a ceremonial figurehead within his own reign, while the actual mechanics of sovereignty were firmly controlled by the younger generation. Queen Camilla concurrently found her sphere of influence entirely eradicated. Her desperate attempts to project an image of enduring relevance were consistently undermined by the flawless and highly coordinated public appearances of William and Catherine. The British press, sensing the definitive shift in the palace winds, largely abandoned their previously sympathetic coverage of the Queen Consort. They began to frame her unwavering loyalty to Sarah Ferguson not as a commendable virtue, but as a dangerous liability that threatened the fragile stability of the entire monarchy. The public discourse turned overwhelmingly hostile, demanding a complete severation of all ties to the disgraced factions of the family. Camilla was ultimately forced to retreat to the secluded sanctuary of her private estate in Wiltshire, effectively entering a state of unofficial exile. She became a tragic casualty in a ruthless war of institutional survival, sacrificing her hard-won public standing on the altar of personal allegiance. Princess Catherine, meanwhile, achieved a level of public veneration reminiscent of the most iconic sovereign figures in British history. Her strategic orchestration of the royal response to the catastrophic scandal earned her the profound respect of both the ruthless political establishment and the anxious general populace. The citizens recognized her not merely as the beautiful consort of the heir, but as a formidable political operator who possessed the intellectual rigor and the emotional fortitude required to guide the monarchy through its darkest hour. Her immaculate presentation and her flawlessly calibrated public statements provided a desperate nation with a reassuring illusion of absolute control. The physical manifestation of her power became undeniable. When she walked into a room, the atmosphere shifted entirely, commanded by a silent authority that demanded absolute deference from seasoned courtiers and visiting dignitaries alike. By the culmination of the year 2026, the monumental transformation of Buckingham Palace was complete. Prince William and Princess Catherine stood unassailed at the apex of the British establishment. They had successfully navigated a scandal that possessed the terrifying potential to entirely eradicate the monarchy. Through a sophisticated combination of forensic internal auditing and ruthless public relations, they had forged a brand new paradigm of royal governance. The archaic institution characterized by absolute entitlement and familial secrecy had been brutally replaced by a highly scrutinized corporate entity defined by radical transparency and relentless accountability. King Charles and Queen Camilla became poignant remnants of a bygone era, serving as a stark reminder of the profound personal cost associated with the preservation of the crown. They represented the final chapter of a deeply sentimental monarchy that could no longer survive the harsh, glaring lights of the modern informational age. The twilight of tradition had finally faded away. Out of the darkness emerged the cold and uncompromising dawn of a radically pragmatic sovereign era led by a king in waiting who understood that absolute survival requires absolute sacrifice. The firm had been saved, but the family, as the world once knew, it was changed forever.